It was a clear afternoon, 33,000 feet above Europe, until a missile tore through the sky and turned a peaceful flight into a war zone. 298 people vanished in seconds. No warning, no survivors. But the real shock: the world still can't agree on who pulled the trigger. This isn't just a crash. This is a cover-up, and you're about to find out why. One moment, a routine flight was cruising quietly over eastern Ukraine. The next, it was a fireball tumbling from the sky, scattering debris, bodies, and burning questions across fields of sunflowers. On July 17, 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 vanished from radar and into history as one of the most disturbing aviation tragedies of the 21st century. A commercial flight shot down in broad daylight. All 298 souls aboard perished. But who was truly responsible? And how could such a devastating mistake, or was it something else, have happened in an age of global connectivity, intelligence, and security? MH17 was a Boeing 777-200ER flying from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, a route often at 33,000 feet. The aircraft was traveling through Ukrainian airspace over a region already engulfed in conflict between Ukrainian government forces and Russian-backed separatists. Despite ongoing tensions, the airspace had not been officially declared unsafe for commercial aircraft at that altitude. It was a gamble the international aviation community took and lost. The first signs of disaster emerged when the flight lost contact just a few hours after takeoff. Witnesses on the ground near Hrabove in the Donetsk region saw a massive explosion in the sky, followed by debris raining down across several kilometers. Shocked villagers ran toward the crash site, only to be met with haunting scenes: twisted metal, smoldering wreckage, passports, toys, and bodies. The magnitude of the tragedy was apparent almost immediately. But the question on everyone's mind was, what brought down MH17? Initial theories ranged from catastrophic mechanical failure to an onboard explosion. But evidence soon pointed to something far more sinister. The aircraft had been shot down by a surface-to-air missile. Forensic analysis of the wreckage revealed high-velocity projectile holes consistent with a warhead detonation. A global investigation was launched involving teams from the Netherlands, Australia, Malaysia, Ukraine, and Belgium. The stakes were high, not just for the families of the victims, but for international diplomacy and the fragile geopolitical order. As investigators combed the crash site, international tensions flared. Russia and Ukraine traded accusations. The separatists, who controlled the territory where the wreckage lay, initially obstructed investigators and were seen mishandling the remains and debris. This only deepened suspicions. Over time, however, a clearer picture began to emerge. According to the Joint Investigation Team JIT, which released its findings in 2016 and 2018, the missile that struck MH17 was a Russian-made Buk surface-to-air missile launched from rebel-controlled territory in eastern Ukraine. The missile system, they said, belonged to the 53rd Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade of the Russian Army, based in Kursk. It had allegedly been transported into Ukraine, used to shoot down MH17, and then returned to Russia the following day. These conclusions were drawn from satellite imagery, intercepted phone calls, and extensive forensic analysis. The evidence, according to the JIT, was overwhelming, yet Russia denied any involvement, dismissing the investigation as politically motivated and flawed. In Moscow's narrative, if MH17 was brought down by a Buk missile, then it was likely fired by the Ukrainian military. Russia claimed that Ukrainian forces had Buk systems in the region and suggested various alternative explanations, from mistaken identity to conspiracy. They also pointed to the fact that Ukraine had allowed flights over a conflict zone. These denials and counterclaims created a fog of misinformation, muddying public perception and making the search for truth even more complicated. The tragedy sparked widespread outrage. Most of the passengers were Dutch citizens, and the Netherlands led the charge in demanding accountability. Vigils were held, investigations expanded, and diplomatic pressure mounted. In 2019, 4 suspects, 3 Russian nationals and 1 Ukrainian, were charged with murder in absentia by Dutch prosecutors. None appeared in court. In 2022, a Dutch court found 3 of the men guilty and sentenced them to life in prison. Russia refused to extradite them. and the fourth suspect was acquitted. The verdict was hailed as a step toward justice, but for many, it was a hollow one. Families of the victims continue to grieve without closure. There's no real punishment for those convicted. No state has officially accepted responsibility. The international response has been fragmented, strong on rhetoric, weak on enforcement. For a world that relies on civil aviation to function, the implications are chilling. Even in the skies, civilians can become collateral damage in wars they have nothing to do with. One of the more troubling questions that remains is why commercial flights were allowed over a war zone in the first place. At the time, many airlines used that corridor to save on fuel and time. The Ukrainian authorities had closed the airspace below 32,000 feet but kept higher altitudes open. MH17 was flying at 33,000 feet just above the cutoff. Some airlines had already started rerouting flights, but not all. Malaysia Airlines was one of many that followed guidance from international aviation regulators, believing the route was safe. The tragedy revealed just how flawed that judgment was. In the aftermath, global aviation authorities reassessed how they assess risk in conflict zones. Airlines became more cautious. Systems were implemented to improve real-time sharing of threat intelligence. Yet the basic vulnerability remains. Aircraft can be targeted deliberately or mistakenly, and the international legal framework for accountability is still weak. MH17 wasn't the first plane shot down during a conflict, and tragically, it hasn't been the last. From Iran Air Flight 655 in 1988 to Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752 in 2020, history is dotted with similar tragedies. In nearly every case, the victims were innocent civilians and justice was partial or absent. What sets MH17 apart is the volume of evidence and the modernity of the systems involved. The fact that a commercial jetliner could be shot down by a sophisticated missile system in peacetime Europe shocked the world. And yet, in the decades since, not much has changed to guarantee such an event won't happen again. As we reflect on the MH17 mystery, we're left with a mix of answers and enduring questions. We know what brought down the aircraft. We have names, dates, and forensic proof, but accountability remains elusive. The geopolitical quagmire has ensured that those truly responsible, if they exist beyond the named suspects, may never face justice. And as time moves on, the world's attention shifts elsewhere, even as the families of the victims carry the weight of that July day forever. The sky, once seen as a symbol of boundless opportunity, now carries the shadows of MH17. It reminds us of how fragile safety truly is in a world where conflicts are complex, borders are blurred, and truth is often the first casualty. The wreckage may have been cleared, and the fields of Donetsk may bloom again, but the unanswered question still lingers in the air: who truly took down MH17, and will the world ever hold them to account? The story of MH17 is not just about the tragedy of a downed aircraft. It's a haunting reminder of how innocent lives can be shattered by invisible decisions made in secret rooms, behind military orders, and within political games. It's about the parents who never saw their children again, the children who never came home from their vacations, the scientists, artists, students, and families who vanished not because of fate, but because of human recklessness and geopolitical arrogance. The skies they trusted became their grave, and while the world lit candles, held memorials, and made promises of justice, time has shown how slow and fragile that justice really is. Years later, we still ask, who gave the order? Who fired the missile? Who knew the truth and stayed silent? We have suspects, satellite images, voice recordings, and courtroom rulings, but the full truth remains obscured behind walls of denial and propaganda. No apology, no compensation, no conviction can restore 298 lives or heal 298 families. And as long as powerful nations can act without consequence, the tragedy of MH17 remains a warning that we are all, in some way, vulnerable to the violent ripple effects of conflicts we never chose. But maybe the worst part is this: the world moved on, news cycles faded, attention shifted, and those responsible still walk free. protected by borders, politics, and power. But for the families, every day is July 17th. Every takeoff, every cloud, every flight path is a memory of what was stolen. And in the wreckage of flight MH17 lies not just twisted metal, but the broken trust of a world that promised safety in the skies. Let this not be just another forgotten headline. Let this be the moment we remember what happens when truth is buried, when accountability is denied, and when silence wins. Because until we demand answers, until we refuse to let go, until the last question is answered, MH17 is not just a tragedy, it is an open wound on the conscience of the world.